G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and so far a fantastic week. Now today, as always, we do have a lot to go over. Of course, we're going to look at the maps. We're going to look in the maps in the north, the south and the east. But what we're going to do today is we're going to line up a lot of geolocations. So we're going to look over a lot of footage. We have a heap of geolocations to not only base positions off, but also what weapons we are seeing used and how this may tell us what's coming in the next weeks or what is being used currently in different positions on the front line. Of course, then we need to talk about what leaders around the world are saying, from Ukraine to China, Russia and Kazakhstan. So we'll look over that. And of course, all this comes about with the increased messaging over maybe some peace in the war. Of course, with Zelensky planning on unveiling his victory plan in the next coming week. So let's look over that and we'll look at this messaging of as long as it takes. And what does that look like currently? And how does that look into the future in this warfare with mobilizations and future military actions? Then we need to look over Ukraine's military intelligence, the GUR, and someone that they have targeted in Russia said to be a propagandist. Some will say a journalist. And of course, that line between the two, this day and age, I don't know if there is a line or it's just all a blur, but we will talk about that at length as well. But the US right now would be in complete chaos if that Ryan Ruth had his way and the assassination against Trump was successful. Of course, we know that was unsuccessful, but I saw some video of him at an event and I thought, I'm going to look back through my footage because I reckon I was at that event. And I logged into my Google Drive, went through my catalog here, and the second video in here, this 1918, I clicked on this, the second one to look at, and right in here, you'll see this gentleman hugging this lady, but then off to the right here, we see Mr. Ryan Ruth right there. So at one point in time, I was somewhat bloody at a same event with himself. Now, of course, everyone who had maybe any association, who was at anything, has stepped away and made statements of we had nothing to do with this bloke. Like I've said, there's especially in the beginning of this war, there were so many just grifters there to raise money or have some level of relevance. How involved was or wasn't he? Shit, I don't really bloody no, but of course that is a massive unfolding story there. Now, what exactly was that event? Now, as we know, the fall of Mariupol and Azovstal and the surrender that then occurred there were a hell of a lot of Azov soldiers be taken prisoner back in Russia. That event was a demonstration by the wives and families of those soldiers calling for a bring the Azovstal fighters home. That's what that event was, and it was a display right in the center of Kyiv. That is why I was there filming as well. So we get so much talk about what's going to come in the next weeks, next months, and with the victory plan being presented, unveiled in the next coming weeks, it'll have a large indication on where this war is going to go. And of course, we know the 10-point peace plan from Zelensky, what Putin said on the eve of the Swiss summit about where he would see peace. These are so far away, and we assume anything here needs military action to achieve those goals. Ukraine wants the 1991 borders. Russia want to annex and take a number of oblasts, of which they don't occupy any incomplete, except for in Crimea itself. And we know there's going to have to be a lot of military fighting if that border is to shift one way or the other in either's favour. But we have seen that Putin is increasing numbers as of then. This is going to go into force on December the 1st. This is a decree by the President of the Russian Federation to bring the regular strength of the armed forces of the Russian Federation to 2,389,000, including 1.5 million military personnel. And this is an increase of 180,000 soldiers. Now, many are saying this is being done over maybe the slower winter period to not only reinforce those fortifications, but also to be able to rotate soldiers, but an increase in soldiers too for offensive or defensive actions in 2025. If the war is still continuing through 2025, if I was a betting man, I'd say that it definitely will be. But again, you never truly know, because if then the President Trump was to come in, then, well, maybe the war will not be, but that will all be something that will come in the next coming months. But we'll look at victory plan, mobilization, and that as long as it takes, like we spoke about. Now, this is from Zelensky's nightly address. The meetings were held in various formats to prepare our Ukrainian victory plan. The real substance of all the points, military, political, diplomatic, and economic. Key people from each sector are involved. The steps designed to give us the strongest possible position to bring about peace, a real peace. So some leverage in this as well, that Ukraine's heading to those at the strongest possible point. There is nothing impossible in this plan. Over 90% has already been written out. Next week, we're preparing to present the victory plan to our allies. So I'm not sure when we will get to see that, but of course we'll do a breakdown and show what actually happens here and our take on this. But like we've said, the goals set forth by Ukraine, the goals set forth by Russia only recently, say the 10-point peace plan, what Putin has said on the eve of the Swiss Peace Summit, these are so far away, we presume there's still a hell of a lot of military action. And to put Ukraine in the best possible position, the strongest possible position with leverage right now on the battlefield, it definitely is not in Ukraine's favour when we talk of manpower, artillery, or territory occupied as well. Now, let's have a look at this idea for as long as it takes. And this comes then into our implications with long-range weapon systems, and something we were told the other day too. Listening to their stories, you realise that Ukraine is bleeding out. Its will to fight is as strong as ever, but the army is exhausted by a ceaseless drone war that is unlike anything in the history of combat. The Biden administration's rubric of support for as long as it takes simply doesn't match the reality of this conflict. Ukraine doesn't have enough soldiers to fight an indefinite war of attrition. It needs to escalate to be strong enough to reach a decent settlement, so put Ukraine in the best position possible. And a victory plans, in my opinion, these can't be relied and can't be messaging on the enemy failing, Russia failing, or your enemy collapsing, a complete Russian collapse. You can't base your military actions, everything about this, not on us being victorious, but on that side then failing and losing. You have to win. You can't rely on them losing, if that makes sense. The messaging early on in the war about how effective the sanctions would be, how Russia will run out of this weapon and run out of this weapon, we have been and gone on a number of those. Now, of course, there are indications in the economy, there are indications in different weapon systems, but is Russia absolutely on its last legs? Well, I don't see any indications of that, any more so than the messaging people were putting out in the first few weeks of the war. One of the issues here that could happen, and we've spoken at length, if there is some peace negotiated settlement right here and now, that victory plan, if it's taking in what we're looking at the front line, right here and now, I don't see what leverage there is to regain that border. And of course, the messaging has been to tens of millions of people, but the only one victory here is to retake all of that territory. And this is, we see again and again from the US, from the EU, this as long as it takes. Well, what if there isn't then what if there just isn't ever enough to actually achieve that? Where does that then lie? You're going to have a decade of war, just as this guy says, just slowly bleeding out in a war of attrition. And there's a really great quote, and I'm not even sure who it is from, but to send men into battle with the knowledge that they are to be sacrificed to the gods of war is a crime against humanity. Now, this is what he talks about from this conference from the Yalta European Strategy, founded 20 years ago to encourage Ukraine's integrity with the West. Now it's trying to prevent the country's destruction. The title of the meeting was The Necessity to Win, but the underlying message was, without more firepower, Ukraine might be forced to settle on Vladimir Putin's terms to halt his brutal onslaught. And it's not just firepower. I think so many people point towards firepower because it's then easy to then blame the US directly on that, and that's a lot of the messaging I see, is everything that we have failure is, it's the US's fault. There's also the massive amounts of manpower needed, and that manpower, not only voluntary but conscription, those guys need that will to win as well. And Ukraine here need to not only stop the Russian advance, they need to go on the advancement. So it can't just be enough manpower and enough firepower to halt the Russians in place. It needs to then actually advance. And currently on the front line, Ukraine can't stop that front line then moving. It's going to need so much more than we have actually seen to then push forward. And like I said in the beginning, I think so much of where we've seen, we'll have a victory through the enemy failing or collapse, and that hasn't yet occurred. And we need to be realistic that the current state of the war in Ukraine is completely unsustainable for the Ukrainian forces and the military aid that is coming in. There's going to have to be something give sooner or later, whether it's more firepower and men conscripted, or there's going to be some settlement. But the way things are right now, I personally think is completely unsustainable. During a break from the conference, I visited a Ukrainian friend, this Sergei Koshman, a freewheeling intellectual from Kharkiv. This man's saying, "We thought that once we showed solidarity, Russia would back off. Now it seems the war could last for decades." He described a radicalization of intellectual life in which the core principle has become, we have to kill as many Russians as possible and find innovative ways to do it. Now, Zelensky, there, as he said, always in his shirt, his green shirt, said the proper range for US supplied weapons should be long enough to act as a game changer and make Russia seek peace. He'll meet Biden in a week in New York to make that plea in person. Again, we know there's been no real budge on these long-range weapon systems, but again, this is one of these things. It's going to, we are going to put the pressure on to make them seek peace. What if they don't? That is the question. You can't rely on them coming to the table to seek peace and failure. I know people will then go, Russia could just back out right now. They could, and that'd be great if they did. That's just not going to happen. So then what is your next steps from there on? And I think these long-range weapon systems that one of my friends, the guys who gives me some information, was bang on when he said, it seems to me that most of the comments about US decision to maintain the policy regarding deep strikes into Russia have centered around purely military implications. I believe this missing the forest for the trees. Since the beginning of the war, relations between Ukraine and the West have been a seemingly endless cycle where Ukraine could demand something, the West would sternly refuse, Ukraine would insist, and the West would give in. We've seen this time and time again, with heavy equipment from armoured vehicles, howitzers, HIMARS, tanks, cruise missiles, ATACMS, F-16s, and probably a few more that I can't recall. Naturally, these systems are of great use to the Ukrainian military, but they've also played an important role in Ukraine's communication strategy, allowing Kyiv to argue that no matter how tough things might seem, there was always the prospect of some improvement, thanks to Western support constantly escalating to ever greater heights. Well, the seemingly endless cycle may have ended and Western support may have peaked. This presents some military challenges, sure, but an even bigger communication one. How does Ukraine keep up morale if there is no clear and credible way to paint a picture for a brighter tomorrow? So these long-range strikes, or the F-16s coming, or back in 2022 when the tanks were coming. Perhaps they'll find something new, other types of wonder weapons to hype up. But I'm not sure what those could be. Tough times ahead if you ask me. Again, if there is no budging on those long-range weapon systems, where is the next hope, that glimmer of hope, one weapon going to come from? Now, let's talk about then mobilisation. As we spoke about Russian mobilisation, this is coming from Financial Times. Ukraine's options for rotating its units or sending in reinforcements are also limited. It is still in the early stages of replenishing its troops after implementing its new mobilisation law in spring, almost a year after Ukraine's general staff first requested it. So this is, I still can't believe that we haven't seen just mass mobilisation called by Ukraine in the hundreds of thousands. That's what it would need to take and trained in the next 6 months, really, to have hope of more successful outcomes in 2025. Again, like I said, with the military actions and where the goals sit, it can't be enough to just halt the Russians. It needs to halt it and then go forward as well. Officials say mobilisation is on track, but it would take another 3 months before the newly trained troops could make an impact on the battlefield. The head of Defence Committee of Ukraine's Parliament, Alexander, this bloke, said to Financial Times. But there is definitely a massive frontline deficit. So will we see large attacks in a quarter of a year? Will we see that in 3 months' time, early 2025? But not only calling up the guys has been an issue, but there's been issues with actually then equipping these units. We've heard Zelensky talk about this as well, of how much equipment they can actually equip these guys to, that there's a lot of infantry units who are not meant to be infantry, but infantry requires the least amount of equipment. Of course, like we've said, offensive, it can't just be all these guys at once, one big push. You need to reintroduce maneuver warfare into the battlefield. You need multiple attacks, simultaneous and successive as well. Now, what we need to look at then is what China and Brazil have said and what the Kazakh president has said as well. Now, I see a lot of people taking the piss of like, who is this guy? Well, some people may post, and when Latvia or Estonia say something as well, again, guys like these we still need to listen to and see what is being said. So the president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev. Now, one thing I will say about Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, of course, in very strategically important positions for Russia and, of course, down through into Iran and Afghanistan. But as well, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan have very high replacement rates, which will become more and more relevant into the next, say, decade. But they're also working on a lot of energy projects with Russia as well. But he said the fact is that Russia is militarily invincible. Now, militarily, no one is invincible. But what I think he may be saying here, because people are taking the piss out of this, I would tend to say I think any major nuclear state may actually be invincible, because if you were to degrade that country militarily, economically, politically, to the point that it's just going to then fall over, will anyone ever actually be prepared to do that to the US, to India, to Russia, to China, to the UK, to France, knowing what those weapons can actually do? So are a large amount of nuclear weapons then sort of make the complete military collapse invincible to a way? Does that then make sense? But conventionally, no one is invincible. Further escalation of the war will lead to irreparable consequences for all of humanity, and above all, for all countries directly involved in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict. Unfortunately, a good chance to achieve at least a truce was missed with the refusal to conclude in the Istanbul Agreement very early on in the war. But the opportunity for peace still exists. It is necessary to carefully consider all peace initiatives of various states and come to a decision to stop military action, and then move on to discussing territorial issues. We've seen and heard many notes like this before. Let's stop the fighting and then discuss other pieces. But what people are saying is, if that never lifts and changes, no budging, the fighting will just restart again at some point. He added, in our opinion, the peace plan of China and Brazil deserves support. So let's have a look at this, and let's have a look at what Zelensky has said about this China-Brazil 6-point peace plan between these foreign ministers here, of a de-escalation of the situation, an opening of dialogue, humanitarian assistance, and that weapons of mass destruction, including biological weapons, should be opposed, attacks on nuclear power plants also opposed, and then dividing the world into political and economic groups should be opposed too. So this division we see, of course, that's going to go into where there are sanctions placed as well, then isolating economies around the world, but doesn't discuss things like territorial integrity. And we know Zelensky has spoken about this on TV in Brazil then very recently. He criticised it, saying it was destructive. You either support the war or you don't support the war. If you support it, then help us stop it. Should we just give up our land, forget that they are killing our people? What is the compromise in that? I think that's why it's destructive, and it's just a political statement. So Zelensky's definitely not on board with the China-Brazil peace plan at this time. So again, what my question is, what could be in the victory plan to be realistic right here and now, given the situation, given what is happening, if it's going to bring a just and lasting peace, guns falling silent, where Ukraine and Russia can both walk away, I guess, feeling like they've had some level of victory? Because if they don't walk away feeling that they've had some level of victory here, why would the other side then stop the fighting? Why at this point in time would Russia stop pushing in areas where it is continuing to make ground, such as Pokrovsk, Ugledar, or up in the north either? So again, we'll have a look at the maps and we'll show you where some things are moving. So let's come on to the map. Here is Ukraine, the center. Here's the capital of Kiev. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Now, the first place I actually want to come is into Chasiv Yar to show you some geolocated footage across here. Now, we don't see any changes here, but we have seen definitely some movements across the canal, and we do presume that this map is well out of date in regards to Klishkivka. And I've seen many, many people pointing this out. We have a Ukrainian map here. Noel Reports shows exactly this. So the best way to line this up is have a look where then the canal runs down in here. This is the same canal. This, of course, is Ivanivsky, then the canal. So he is showing that a large amount of territory has been made across near, see where this dog leg is in the road, so where my cursor is here, as well out from Klishkivka. So you can see this is the turn in here, so that the Russian forces have made it to here and crossed in this forest belt across here as well, taking a lot of this green area in here, including Klishkivka, which lines up with what we've seen other maps, including Suryak, showing as well. But we believe that Russia is trying to more soften up Chasiv Yar as well, given some footage today. So I'll give you a geolocation in 1 second. We see this video here of 4 Fab 250s being dropped by, we presume, a Su-34 bomber into then Chasiv Yar itself. Now you can get an idea of where in the industrial zone that these have hit, and we see some more footage of these then occurring. Now the way I actually got the geolocation on this one myself, so always be a little bit warned when it is myself. But if we just have a look on then Google Earth here, you can see where this road is running down in here, and it's in this industrial sector just before Chasiv Yar. So we're talking just in here where my cursor is, that where those fabs are dropping. So softening up, we presume, targets in there to see if there will be more pushes across that canal and into the center of Chasiv Yar itself, as Russia, by the looks of it, is trying to get more and more ground on the flanks to prevent a cutoff and to have some level of fire support on this front as well. Now, we do have another couple to look at in some other areas. Let's come down into then the Pokrovsk front, and we do see some changes here, of course, in the direction of Zeleny Persha. I still believe this map is catching up in this direction. We see northern pushes out near Krasny Yar and Krasny Yar as well in here. Now, there is some talk about that Krasny Yar has been under occupation and that there is presence in Krasny Yar. Again, this is why we use multiple maps. But one thing we do see here is we haven't seen, at least on this map, movement towards Pokrovsk in this direction up here for a couple of days. Today, we are then seeing that, as well as in Horodka, more control by the Russian forces being in this town as well. So there's still a lot of movement happening in here, as well as no change in these areas here, which we do know a lot of maps are showing very different there as well. But again, strap in, we will get more of an idea into the future. No changes shown on this map down in Ugledar. Don't have Suryak map state, but there is some very interesting geolocations. Can't show you this video on here, but this is a Ukrainian drone dropping munitions on Russian infantry in Ugledar. Now, the geolocation here is a very interesting bit too, and I've seen some bloggers online saying, wow, I didn't expect them to be in this spot. So where they were dropping on these Russian positions was right on this corner down in here. So having some level of advancement in that area that we haven't seen for a while right there. That's why it's important to use geolocations and also use different sources, different maps as we go. But if we move our way up the map, we do see then a major shift just in and around Terny and Nevsky here somewhere. I think this is about 3 or 4 kilometers, but 2.6 kilometers in here at just this point, maybe depending where you measure, but definitely a larger advancement here. I don't believe this was all in one day, as we have seen Suryak and some other maps in here show very different, but this map has then updated to show that area. Now, in the Pishani front, showing more movement out here toward the Oskil as well. We know Russia's trying to move and advance this front in here. We presume trying to get right through to the Oskil and split this into a north and south element. Now we'll come up in Kharkiv, where we haven't seen too much around Volchansk or around Holeboki Lipsy either, but we do see that Ukraine did have some level of advancement in here by the blue within 2 weeks. We then reported that, but Noel reports today is showing that Russia had pushed back and taken more back of Holeboki as well. Then there's back and forward. Now this map is showing that. It doesn't show that change of day to day. Now I do not have the footage of this, but we have seen that over the last couple of months, there has said to be an isolated Russian element out here. Now there is footage floating around of Russia actually bombing this exact area, and many are saying that there must have been a withdrawal of these guys out and now shelling this area. If that front line has moved, I'll try and get more and more information on that as I can. So we'll come up into Kursk here. Again, we don't really use the deep state for this map, but one thing we do see is a small amount of grey zone popped up in then the middle here yesterday, indicating there must be some level of surrounded force. And deep state has spoken about this. In Kanoyani, they have been surrounded for some time. It's being reported that through the clearing, but the enemy is still there. So basically that this isn't a new surrounding, but these guys have somewhat always been there and it's never actually been completely cleared out. And there are some break-ins and outs. That said, other maps aren't showing that, but we can see a number of differences on these maps. So let's come across onto then the Noel reports map. Now let's start down in Borky, as we do see an amount of red moving into Borky then today. As we have seen, Zurich yesterday spoke that Borky has come under Russian control. Now, there is more geolocated footage than this, but this is just the one that I'll use here of Akhmat then clearing some of these buildings here. Now, what we can see is just down to the south of Borky in here. Now, I should say there is other footage further in. This is just the one I'm showing you today at this sort of like H-looking building from the top. So if we come into Borky itself, where we're looking is just in here, definitely some level of clearance and more footage showing inside of Borky as well. So we can update that map of where that is sitting, and we know Noah Reports is also agreeing with that assessment. So let's have a look around Lyubimovka itself, as we have seen a large armoured assault into Lyubimovka too. Now again, one of the geolocations is done by me, so just hold on to your hats, but it does line up. So we have this footage here of these Russian vehicles then crossing across a number of tanks, infantry fighting vehicles. Hard to get an idea, but moving down into these tree lines under heavy fire for Ukrainian positions both ways in here, moving into this tree line, we presume, dropping off a number of elements, and we can see a hell of a lot of fighting going on. Now, if you jump then onto my geolocation that I've put out here, we have Lyubimovka just here. See where this tree line runs, sort of the squiggle down here. They are moving across the paddock in this direction in here. So definitely grey, potentially blue, but we can then presume and know that there are forces definitely present in this area, and that movement from Snagost and Russia's counter-offensive that is occurring in Kursk as well. So let's have a look at some other bits and pieces that I found interesting here too. So of course, this map doesn't show it. Jump onto Noel Reports' map, and we have seen that there are two front lines, other front lines that have opened up in Kursk, one towards Glashkovo and one basically on the direction of where Russia is launching this counter attack. Now, we do have footage to prove of where these vehicles were. So we see just off the border section right here, about 2 k's in, this is where this footage is geolocated too. So we definitely know there is some level of presence and control in here too. So we do see then a tank and another tank moving through then this paddock. And I'm very interested in more so what the weapon is being used. Now, this looks more like an engineering style tank to myself, but we see then a strike on this T-64 here. Now, the interesting part in this is I believe that this is actually one of those fiber optic used drones that we have seen that are actually towing that small piece of fiber optic cable striking. That is a very interesting part that we're seeing only used in Kursk, but we have seen to use to some success. And will we see that float out to other areas on the front line too? And one of the other reasons that this is very interesting bit of footage is we do know there have to be some restrictions on how those can work, but we can see that fiber optic drone definitely then flies across power lines and then crashes into a protected mobility vehicle here as well. Again, we're not sure on the amount of damage, but I'm very interested in anything that shows those fiber optic drones as well. Now, Noel Reports does say that there may be some other, at least claimed presence out here. So we see these two front lines, but if we look just to the west of this second push here, other than the main assaulting force, just down in here, that there is claimed Ukrainian control in here too. I don't have any geolocations of that. We only have the claims so far. So I guess wait out and we'll see what occurs on this. But that is all the map updates I have for you today. We'll wait and see then what Syriac map says tomorrow, as I think that will be very interesting as well. Now, let's have a look at what the GUR have posted, of course, Ukraine's military intelligence on Twitter and then on their website as well. So I can't show you the bottom two photos here, but it's basically a guy dead on the ground. The crab was broken and through the skull. A war criminal and propagandist of the Kremlin was eliminated in Russia. So that was on the official Twitter. And then we'll jump across onto then this. According to information available to the GUR, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, on September 15th, 24, in the city of Belgorod, the skull of the Ukrainian propagandist Alexander, this bloke Kodorov, nicknamed Crab, was broken. The accomplice of war crimes and Kremlin genocide of the Ukrainian people died from the injuries. The propagandist worked for Russia 1 channel and Zvezda TV channel. And what I ask in here, though, is what level of accomplice to war crimes was this guy as well, and to genocide too? And as I say, what is now in war, in the information war online, everything, where is the threshold between journalist propagandists? Is it state paid by someone? Is it not agreeing with this? Is it spreading false information? Where actually is that? Because there's just so much propaganda online, people paid by states as well. One's on some sides, one's on other sides. It's very interesting, and this is too. And like I said, I could point to 50 people on both sides as well that report, celebrate like blatant war crimes as well, under the guise of bloggers, propagandists, journalists. It's so difficult of where actually is that line then be? Where is it? What is targetable? What is not targetable? In the pursuit of recognition and rubles of the Kremlin masters, he constantly performed dirty work far from his native places. The propagandists not only prepared false materials about the war, but also personally participated in the commission of grave war crimes against Ukraine. The GI Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reminds that there will be a fair retribution for every war crime. But again, like I say, I see so many people celebrating, clapping bloody of blatant war crimes online. Especially the most common is just blatant war crimes conducted by people flying drones. But at what point does someone, whether a blogger, a journalist, a propagandist that sits, and both of those can easily come into this, at what point is that person actually targetable for a fatal attack? Now, I do believe that the pen is mightier than the sword, but again, these people, at this bloke, at this point, still seems like a non-combatant. When can you actually strike that? I'll be very interested in that. Similarly to the targeting of Alexander Dugin that ended up killing his daughter. Is there a level of propaganda? Yeah. Is it a difference in opinions and views and this and that? Yeah. Where does reporting, propaganda, participating, where is that all fit into this? Because I'm saying this is a very hot topic at the time. Some people celebrating, yep, kill all the propagandists. And the other side, you're killing a journalist here that you may not agree with. Now, I can't speak on this guy directly, but we have seen a number of journalists killed throughout this war as well. So it'll be very interesting to see, especially this guy walking around in Belgorod. So again, what will we see into the future? I don't know. But the line between blogger, journalist, propagandist, there's no line anymore. That's why I say to be very, very careful online. But where does it need to cross a threshold for then a lethal attack to be conducted? Anyway, legends, have a fantastic day, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.